Hey guys, this is BenCB for Raise Your Edge. Today I'm gonna teach you guys everything you need to know about heads up in sit and goes. This is an update, so there's already a heads up course, but since poker is changing from year to year, I also wanna update the courses as much as possible so that you are up to date. Today we're going to talk about typical mistakes in these days. What do people wrong? What are the biggest leaks in heads ups? Obviously we will talk about heads up in sit and go games, not hyper heads up or turbo heads up games itself. So always six-handed, multi-table sit and goes. When we reach heads up, what do people wrong? Secondly, I will teach you the perfect strategies how to play heads up in position. Also, we're gonna construct ranges together for pre-flop. There I will always look at both sides of the coin, GTO ranges, but also showing you how to adapt properly. The same for out of position, and we will cover both pre-flop and post-flop, and I will also give you some examples. I would say let's jump right into the action. So typical mistakes. Very unbalanced small blind range. I see that very often that people either are raise folding too much, have very leaky, unbalanced small blind limping range. That means that you can raise a lot, you can jam a lot against their small blind limps, but we will come to that later. I just want to talk about more general things when speaking about typical mistakes. Yeah, also in general, they are not playing as much as they should from the small blind, especially when it comes to limping, because by limping you can play your small blind a lot. Not only with 20 to 25 big blinds, but also around 10, 11, 12 big blinds, you can still limp a ton. You can play repip around 80 to 90% without getting exploited. You can make adjustments though if your opponent is aggressive, but as a basic strategy, you should limp a ton from the small blind. Same applies for playing the big blind, especially when it comes to a little bit more deeper stacks, deeper in terms of 20 to 25 big blinds. That they, especially on lower and mid stakes, people are under defending the big blind a bit. They are definitely rejamming too tight with 15 to 20 big blinds. So hands that are really good rejams, especially versus wider open raising ranges, they just want to rather see a flop, play a little bit more conservative, and they don't really see how profitable it is to rejam. Obviously, flatting with many hands is profitable as well, but when your opponent is open raising a lot, it is really hard to reach a higher EV by defending passively. Hence, we want to rejam more hands. So even hands like 10-9, Jack-10 suited are very profitable, or since your opponent is raise folding so much. Adapting too slow. That means that many players are not able to adapt properly based on their opponent. In heads up, dynamics or the game flow is really important. If you have watched my previous courses, you know that the previous coaches were more about playing exploitively, exploiting population tendencies. This course also covers a lot about game theoretical stuff, especially GTO. GTO means game theoretical optimum. So I want you to be best prepared if you are playing against good opponents, and you have to be, or you have to consider that your opponent might exploit you when you play a very exploitive strategy, which is really good for your confidence, because when you know, okay, my ranges are very well grounded, they are super balanced, that he cannot exploit me, you will play with more confidence, which will help you a lot. But let's come back to adapting too slow. If you play against a fish, for example, you don't want to play GTO at all. You don't want to jam as much hands as Nash. You don't want to call as Nash or as loose as Nash suggests you to call. You want to play very, very exploitative. Also, when you feel that your opponent is raising and jamming your small blind limps a lot, after a few hands, you want to already start adapting a bit. So the game flow is really, really important, especially against weaker opponents. Also, when you rejammed twice or 3 times in a row, the game flow itself will become more aggressively. Hence, you kind of like can expect that your opponent will overtake these aggressive dynamics and this aggressive flow as well and play a little bit more aggressively. So be aware of the game flow, of the dynamics, and adapt based on your opponent. Playing poorly versus fish, it comes along with adapting to slow. Especially calling Nash is completely bullshit against recreational player because they are not aware of Nash. They never jam close to Nash ranges. You never want to jam the Nash ranges yourself. You want to limp a lot. You want to play very, very, more or less a small ball approach. You want to grind him down rather than open jamming marginal hands with deeper stack size, especially over 10 big blinds. You want to try to play as much post flop as possible. Actually, also with 7, 8 big blinds, you want to grind him down. But if you have a very profitable jam, then you can go for it. But try to avoid the marginal jams and play as much post flop as possible against the recreational player. Wrong hand selection for pushing versus limps. I want to show you that later. What kind of hands you want to select for jamming, also for raising versus limps, so that you have a good idea how to attack limps. So let's start with playing heads up in position. The deeper you are, so more than 20 big blinds, you want to raise more than limp. Should be self-explaining. You wanna build up the pot, especially with your stronger hands. You don't want to limp only, but even with 20 big blinds and more, it is totally fine to have a mixed strategy. You can raise a few hands, you can limp a few hands, but I want to show you that later based on the ranges I constructed for you with the help of GTO tools, Hold'em resource calculator, and also based on my and other players' experience, what is best to play in position with certain stack sizes. The shorter you get, the more you want to limp. Why? The reason is, if you raise a ton with 12 and 13 big blinds, let's say 80%, your opponent can just rejump a ton against you because there's not a lot of dead money in the middle. He's risking less compared to 20 big blinds. He's only risking 12 or 13 big blinds to win the same amount of dead money. Hence, you have to play less hands, so you can only raise around 50 to 60%. But this cannot be optimal to play only 50, 60, maybe 70% hands from the small blind if you play a raising strategy or mixed strategy limping raising. But if you play a limp or shove only strategy with around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 big blinds, you can still play a ton of hands. You can play around 80, 90% from the small blind, and your opponent can't exploit that. So the shorter you get, the more you want to limp. The deeper you get, the more you can start raising, because the risk reward ratio for the rejam with a deeper stack size is worse than with a shorter stack size. As easy as that. That is the basic approach for heads up you want to keep in mind. So if you want to keep it as simple as possible, but also have a very, very strong small blind range, your opponents can't exploit you. You don't want to have a raise. You don't want to have a raising range at all versus regulars. GTO doesn't min raise. Just speaking about the raising. Obviously, there we can jam and we can limp, but we don't have a min raising or 2.5x raising range at all. If you know that, you're good to go. Again, be aware or keep in mind that against certain opponents you don't want to follow GTO. Then you just try to play your hand max EV. So if you know, okay, King Jack suited is a standard limb for you with 12 big blinds, but you play against a weaker opponent who's defending too many hands, who's fairly weak post flop, you just try to play your hand max EV. You're not thinking about your range. So always keep in mind there are two ways. One, GTO or having a balanced range against better opponents. Secondly, the second way, play your hand max EV. Don't think about balancing at all. When you think King Jack suited, it's better to raise because your opponent is weak, he's very aggressive, so you wanna he's rejamming a lot, you wanna raise to this hand. Hence, you wanna limp more weaker hands because he's so aggressive and rejamming a lot against you. So this is how you can adapt properly. In general, small ball approach, grinding them down. It comes along with limping a lot, playing a lot of pots in position, take advantage of your positional advantage. Okay, if you raise a lot, you're playing less pots in position because your opponent is not defending every single hand. But if you limp, he's checking a lot, hence you play more hands in position. Also smaller pots. But if you raise, you play less pots in position, but bigger pots. The stack to pot ratio gets smaller, so often it goes check jam on the flop, right? If you min raise with 12 big blinds, the pot is already so big that most likely it goes bet, all in, fold, bet, all in, call, or you bet the flop, you jam the turn. So most of the times the hand will end on the turn, whereas when you limp, you can play 3 streets in position. So you're increasing your positional advantage, whereas when you just min raise all the time, you're playing flops and maybe some turns most of the time only. So not only pre-flop but also post-flop, you're kind of like destroying your own positional advantage. Avoid marginal pre-flop all-ins. Again here, if you play against very good opponents and you want to be balanced, then sometimes here and there you have to take marginal pre-flop all-ins, but especially on low and mid stakes, people don't really have an idea to play heads up. So if you're a guy that plays $100 and higher buy-ins, then you should take care a little bit more playing a balanced range. But you probably know on your stakes who are the better players, who are working a lot, who are playing solid ranges. Even on the very high stakes, there are many regulars who don't really know how to have a good heads up range. So keep that in mind. But in general, if you don't have any reads, you don't have any information about your opponent, it's really good to know how to approach heads up in general, and then you can start making adjustments from there. And not being completely clueless and just clicking random buttons. Yeah, marginal hands, put them in your limping range. So if you're not sure whether it's a jam, it's often the so-called bottom of your jamming range or the top of your folding range. These are very good hands to put in your limping range. Alright, let's talk about playing post-flop, about the theory of playing post-flop in position. You probably learned that in the previous heads-up course, or also in the especially in the post-flop course, that playing post-flop short is a protection game. Very often it's not about betting for value, betting as a bluff. It's about protecting your equity and denying your opponent's equity. Very often it means folding out 6-outers. So very easy example, just imagine the board is 4-4 deuce, we have a hand like Queen 7 suited, we limp pre-flop, we just bet the flop. We don't necessarily get called by verse, so we don't have a value bet. Also, we're not folding out better hands, but our hand is very often the best hand on the flop if we look at his entire range. So we have to protect our hand, and we just bet very tiny to fold out his quote-unquote air hands. So we don't want him to make a pair on the turn, so we bet with these kind of hands. So we bet many flops and work with small sizings. So equity denying. Very often it is about equity denying. That means folding out many 6-outers. But think about what part in villain's range do you want to attack. First of all, get rid of your 50% pot size button. It doesn't have any merits in choosing a 50% pot size bet. You basically accomplish the same by choosing a 1/3 bet size because you just want to fold out air hands, or you just want to deny his equity. You can work with bigger sizings though, but then go for bigger than 50%. Very often on many boards he's not folding out that many more hands by choosing 50% pot size. So it is often really good to go for a smaller sizing. But by choosing a bigger sizing, you gain additional fold equity. So you're attacking more hands in your opponent's range. Also, your value hands benefit from it. So this is really, really often the case when the board is a little bit more wet. So let's say a board like 10-9-6. If we bet 1/3, he might float with a lot of 8 or 7x hands, also with most of the 6x hands. But if we, let's say, work with a 60, 70 or 80% pot size bet, we kind of put him in a really, really difficult situation continuing with these kinds of, he actually has to fold them, because if he's still overcalling, our value hands benefit tremendously. So always be aware, okay, what do I want to accomplish by choosing a certain sizing? And very, very often it is either a smaller sizing or a bigger sizing. Again, if you play against weaker opponents or fish, just go for the sizing that is max EV. Don't think about your range, don't think about your opponent's range. If the board is wet and you have a value hand, just bet big. If you want to bluff, just bet small. That's pretty much it. But if you play against better opponents, think about what do you want to accomplish, and you can learn that by marking as many hands as possible. Look through them afterwards. Okay, I just recently wrote an article about learning properly, and it is really important that you know that when playing, it's more about trusting your instincts and trusting what you have learned, your fundamentals, and just play. Obviously, think about what you do, be aware. But when you start thinking about hand combinations and you're forcing yourself into playing optimally, you're gonna end up being very overwhelmed and confused by all that stuff. So actually, this is something you do besides the tables. You do in your session review or on your warm-up routines. You analyze your hands, you analyze your bet sizings, you look, okay, does it really make sense to bet small, to what kind of ranges want to do, or what part of my opponent's range I want to attack. Does it really make sense to bet bigger or smaller? This is what you do afterwards. And the more you do it, the more you repeat it, the more confident you become. And then you don't, or the less energy and time you have to invest when being in these kind of situations. Be aware of that. So if you're still struggling a lot, accept it, just grind your game, stick to your game, and don't try to force yourself to adapt these concepts. Give yourself time, do it besides the tables. It's really, really important. Otherwise, you're just confusing yourself, you lose confidence, and you end up doing more and more mistakes. So, value betting. We only value bet hands that have 2 streets of value on turn, on flop and turn, which are vulnerable hands. So let's say the board is very drawy, we have a weak top pair, or let's say a top pair on a low board, something like 6-7 on 6-7 or a 6-3 deuce. We always bet on the flop. Never should be self-explaining. We need to protect our hand. We have a value bet, plus we fold out equity. So on any kind of boards where we have a vulnerable top pair, always bet. Don't check back, don't be tricky on these boards. Even though your opponent might be aggressive, never ever check. Okay, really important. Yet, if you have a hand that has only 2 streets for value anyway, the board is kind of dry, so our hand is almost invulnerable. The so-called locked up boards, so let's say Jack deuce suited on Jack 5-3 or Queen 5 on Queen 8 deuce. So really dry board, no flush draw, very little gut shots present. Then it is good to check back. Otherwise, we would just value turn ourselves. Yet, if we're playing against an idiot, a maniac, a fish, 3 streets for value, ba-boom. Okay. Against regulars, sometimes you want to also have some top pairs in your check back range, and then we call down, because if we only have 2 streets of value, then we can just bet on the turn and river. We don't lose any value, but additionally we give him the option to bet on the turn his bluffs. If we bet the flop, he's folding out most of his bluffs, but if we check the flop, he can lead his bluffs on the turn. So not only getting 2 streets of value if he checks the turn again, turn and river, we give him also the chance to bluff with his weaker hands on the turn. So yeah, check the flop, bet turn and river. Whereas fish or weak regulars, straightforward, play your hand max EV. So by checking, you also protect your equity. Every draw that can't bet broke, especially when the check raise likelihood is high, check back. For example, 7-6 on 9-8 deuce, check. King 5 on King 5 on deuce 3-4 suited, check. Though this might be a hand we can broke, depends a little bit on the stack size. If we are only 8, 9, 10 big blinds, but King 5 suited should be a jam with 8, 9, 10 big blinds almost every single time though. But if we are a little deeper, it's gonna be really nasty. Jack 10 on 9-8 deuce bet. We dominate many worse draws. We have plenty of equity against 9x, fold equity, so we can easily bet broke here, or even bet call if he's raising or jamming against his raise. Yada. 10-6 on deuce 3-4 hands, always really good candidate to bet, because if we bet here and we get raised, we don't have that much equity against this value range anyway, right? If he has already a straight, if he has any kind of 2 pair or a strong 4x, I mean, he's probably never raising a 3 or 4. So the only hands he's raising with are 2 pairs, straights, or very strong 4x hands. So against that range, we have less equity when we have a 5x hand, because we have an open-ended straight draw. So you want to bet these hands that, especially on these kind of boards, that have some equity, but not as much equity as, for example, an open-ended straight draw or a weak flush draw. Same for Queen 10 suited on 9-8. Oh, there's missing a deuce, so it should be 9-8 deuce suited. Also, we're not folding out that many better hands. We're protecting our range a bit because it's actually a very disguised hand. We can continue many turns. So I would also check. The S, by the way, means suited, so it's a suited board. Whatever, it's not, doesn't stand for spade, it stands for suited, so that there's a flush draw present. Or King deuce suited on deuce 3-4, bet, because we have to protect our hand. Let's say he has a hand like 8-9, 8-7, 10-7 suited, Jack 6 suited. We have to bet and protect our hand, and then we go from the turn. If we get raised, we know it's very likely that we are beat. Also, most of the time in these days, people are not playing their draws aggressively. That means I'm not really afraid of getting bluffed out of the pot with the draw. It might happen, but the benefit of betting a king deuce and just folding out the 6 others are so huge that I don't really want to risk checking and giving it a free card. I mean, you have to keep in mind, if the flush comes on the turn, unless we make a backdoor flush draw, if the if on a 5, on a 6, on a 7, 8, 9, 10, and he leads out, we cannot really stand a turn bet. Showdown value plus gut shot hands, good candidates for delayed bet or check down. For example, Queen 10 on 9-8 suited, 10-6 on 9-8 deuce suited, I would always bet. So that you have a rough idea how you can construct your betting ranges and your checking ranges on the flop. Really important, and this is something you have to write down and you have to keep in mind every single time you play short stack post flop. Don't waste equity by bet folding high equity hands. That's pretty much it. If you're if your draw is strong enough to go broke, then bet. Especially then, if you dominate many other draws, weaker draws, he can play maybe aggressively, or you just check jamming. So like 10-9 on 8-7 whatever, 8-7 king, right? Where you can check jam 6-5, 9-6, maybe something like 10-6, and then we still often dominate better, weaker draws. Plus, if he has a king or an 8, we still have decent equity. Okay, keep that in mind, really important. So, now we're going to talk about ranges. We will construct ranges, or I will show you ranges, how you can play in position for certain stack sizes. So first of all, we're going to talk about 20 big blinds and deeper, or more or less around 20 big blinds. First, we're going to cover a range where we min raise more than we limp. So this would be basically a really good range for playing around 20 big blinds. As you can see, we are only open jamming deuces to 5s. The dark blue hands are apparently our open raise or value open raise hands. So hands we raise call against the jam, or we peel versus 3-bet. But most of the hands I would 4-bet jam. The only hands I would call against a 3-bet are Queen Jack suited, maybe some low suited aces, and maybe something like ace-7, ace-8 off. Other than that, I would just 4-bet jam most of the, pretty much all of the hands here. And as you can see, we are raising very polarized. So the yellow hands or the orange hands are our min raise fold hands. So we're not continuing against 3-bets. We are not calling apparently against jams. And then the middleish part here, these are our hands we limp and call against the raise. So this is already a very, very strong limping range. You can definitely fold some of the bottom hands, which is totally fine. So for example, King 5, King 6, 7-6, 4-3 suited, 8-4, 7-4 suited, 9-5, 10-5, Jack 3 suited. So you can definitely fold these hands. Again, the min raise range with around 20 big blinds is already more or less an exploitive strategy. Keep that in mind. I'm going to show you now also a more range of limping and raising. I mean, here we are limping a lot, but we're still raising a ton. Usually, especially in heads up, we want to actually limp more hands. The ace-6 to ace-deuce off and the ace-4 to ace-deuce suited are hands we limp jam. And you can see that we have a lot of strong hands in our limping range as well. But this is for one reason, because we don't really want to raise fold a hand like 10-9 suited. It's basically the same spiel here. We don't want to waste equity. Raise folding a hand with 10-9 suited would suck a lot. So we're just limping these kind of hands that can't stand an all-in. So this is all the theory behind that you don't want to waste equity. As easy as that. Also, here you can see our small blind range. This is what we are min raising, and as you can see, big blind can't rejam that wide. This looks totally fine. So our min raising range is really good balanced, and our limping range is pretty strong anyway. So there's nothing or not much that villain can do against our strategy, and we're playing a ton of hands, which is our goal. The main priority when playing from the small blind is we want to play as much hands as possible. We don't want to play too much, 82 or 95%, but here we play around 90%, and this is pretty near or pretty close to the optimum. Oh, by the way, we were talking about this range here, min raise. Alright, so let's speak about this range. This is a range where we limp more hands than min raising compared to the previous range. Actually, we could play a few more hands based on the fact that we limp more hands. So limping 10-3, 9-4, 8-4, 6-3 off, and even 9-3 off is okayish. Not even okayish, it is okay. So because of us limping more, we can increase our small blind VPIP from 90 to 92, 93%. So let's have a closer look. What do we open raise? We open raise, as you can see, the offsuited aces for only one reason. They need a little bit more protection. They play a little bit worse in a limp pot. We open raise sixes and better. We have a few trap limps with aces and kings. You don't necessarily have to limp aces 100%. You can also limp aces 80-70%. Same for kings, 80-70%. Then you limp queens 50%. So you can also mix it up and weighten your hands. So, but it's just about giving you a rough idea about the frequencies. The frequencies we want to limp with, the frequencies we want to raise with, and so on. So the suited aces are in our limp jam range. Same for king, queen, king, jack suited, the weak offsuited aces. But it is also totally fine to put the the weak offsuited and the weak suited limping hands in your limp call range, so you have some aces in your range when limping and then calling a raise, which is really good. People will never expect that. And then, as you can see, the raise forward hands are more or less low equity hands. They are not really the very trashy hands, but they're also not these kind of middle strong hands like 10-9, 10-8 suited. So raise folding these kind of hands wouldn't be that a disaster. And then the yellow ones are our limp fold hands. The light blue hands are our limp call versus 3x raise. We limp calling aces and kings. And yeah, that's how our range looks like. And again, you're very well prepared. Apparently, we can't cover every single stack size, 19, 18, 17 big blinds. So the ranges change a little bit if you play 17 big blinds. You can start jamming some more hands because you're risking a little bit less than compared to 20 big blinds. But again, as I mentioned earlier, actually you want to avoid this. Also, you have to raise a little bit less. You have to start shifting your range more towards limping. So be aware of that. Just if you follow the basic guidelines I gave you at the beginning of this course, right? The shorter we get, the more we want to limp. The deeper we get, the more we want to raise. Then you are good to go. You don't necessarily have to create an entire new range for 8 or 17 bigs. So what I would do in that case, if I know, okay, someone would give me that 20 big blinds range, and he gives me what we're going to do later is a range for 12 big blinds, and now I want to find out what I can play with 16 big blinds. I'm basically putting, I'm folding a few more hands, so I would play around maybe 85 to 90% of hands. I would stop min-raising some more hands I min-raise, for example ace-7, ace-8, ace-9 off, or I can also put ace-king, ace-queen, king-queen off in my limping range. as well as ace jack off. I would also start limping some of the red hands, 10-6, 10-5, 9-5, 8-5 suited. So let's take a look. Our raise forward percentages is 13.88%. So instead of 13%, I would raise around 8 to 9%. So at the end, when I get, or maybe 7 to 8%. So at the end, if I'm below 15 bigs, then I'm limping 0%, min raising 0%. Sorry. So you're decreasing the amount of hands you're raising with as bluff and as value. So you have to decrease both parts of that hand category, bluff and value, and putting them into my limping range. As easy as that. And also in general, folding a few more hands, and then you are good to go. But also, right, if you're around 15, 14, you can start jamming a few hands like Jack 9 suited, 10, 8 suited. So just that you're not limp folding every single time. And that's pretty much it. I will give you also an example for 12 big blinds in a few seconds, so that at the end you can see, okay, this is how it should look like with 12 big blinds. Then you can easily construct your range for 14 big blinds or 16 big blinds. As easy as that. But keep in mind, adapt on your opponent. I can't say that often enough, because it will be very, very rarely that you're gonna follow these ranges 100%. It's gonna be super unlikely. Most of the time, you will have a feeling of your opponent. If he is super tight, super passive, you wanna play almost 100% hands from this moment. If he's very, very aggressive or more aggressive, you wanna fold a few more hands. Maybe adapt his or exploit his tendency of raising too many limps, jamming too many limps, or rejamming too much against your min raises. You can be very, very exploitive there, because especially in heads up, people have big egos. If you already be aware of your ego and you can forget about your ego, then you have automatically an edge. So now we're gonna jump into around 11. It's actually more 12 big blinds, so that you know how to play with around 11 to 12 big blinds. So here we go. This is already more on the tighter side. You can actually add also Jack 9, 9-4, and 8-4 off, as well as 5-3 off. But I didn't include these marginal hands, because I think, especially on lower mid stakes, it's not needed to be that balanced. So it's not 100% GTO though, so I already implemented some adjustments to increase the entire EV of your range, or the EV of the entire range. Because I think you are not gaining that much money by limping a hand like 9-4 off. But if you're gonna put it into some solver tools, they will tell you that you can also limp these kind of hands. Okay, let's take a closer look how our range looks like. As you can see, it follows basically the same rule, not wasting equity. So we don't want to raise fold any kind of hands anyway. We're just playing limp only. We're not raise folding a hand like 9-8 or 10-9 suited. So the greenish, what is it, dark, not brown green, so like ace king suited, are limp shoves. Same as 6s to 10s. For example, lower mid stakes, I would just jam 6s and 7s. Even though our limping range gets a little bit more attackable, because we have 2 hands or 2 stronger hands less in our range. But this is something people will never figure out. So you can definitely jam these kind of hands. Totally fine. But if you know your opponent is a bit more aggressive against limps, then you know how to readapt and put them back into your limping range. So this is the power of having these ranges. You can jump back and forth. You know how to adapt properly. What kind of hands are your limping range? What hands to put whatever in your jamming range to increase the EV. You can play around with these ranges against your opponent. The orange ones are the limp call versus a 3x raise. Again, if your opponent is more passive and you're just grinding him down. You don't want to limp. I would basically fold 50% of my limp call versus 3x range, or my limp call range versus 3x raise. I would fold 50%. I would call the suited kings, the strongest suited queens, jack 6, 10 6, 9 6 suited, 10 9, jack 9, queen 9, jack 10 off, maybe king 8 off. The other hands I would fold if I know he's tight. If he only has a few bluffs, there's no need to defend 7 for suited, 8 7 off, king 6 off, or 10 6, 10 5 suited. So I would be more weaker in my limping range there. I would also basically limp almost 100% if I know he's weak and passive. But if you know he's can be aggressive, I'm limp calling my entire range that I want to continue against the 3x raise. So no matter if I have 7-4 suited or 10-8 off, because it's just a profitable defend. And then open shoving the dark green hands, because if we have too many, let's say if we also start limp folding 10-8 suited, jack 8 suited, jack 7 suited, we would allow our opponent just way too much profit with his ISO jams, especially when he's jamming weaker hands. So we would want to take the very profitable jams and we just jam them. What else? Yeah, orange limp fold versus 3x ISO raises. Again, if someone is opening or ISO raising 2.5x, you have to defend more. So hands like 9-7, 10-7, jack 7, king 5 off, 4-3 suited, 7-6 off, jack 3, jack 2 suited, you have to increase your range. Same spiel for if he open raise bigger. If he's open raising 4 times the big blind, we can basically for almost a lot of our limping range. And the light blue, our limp call versus a raise and shove. That means we call versus a raise and we call versus a shove. That's it. The brown green is limp, and if he raises, we shove. Okay, so as you can see, you have a really strong range against his ISO raise. For jacks and queens, I would probably lean more towards jamming with jacks and jamming 50% of queens and calling with 50% of queens. So again, you can also make some adjustments where you think, I think people are not raising that much on my limits, so if I think they are not raising much, hence their range is more value heavy, so I want to get it in with jacks and get the setup on my side. Same for queens. Okay, so this is where you can also make adjustments to increase the EV of single hands or for single hands. Alright, now let's play out of position. Let's talk about out of position. First of all, when we face a limp, we want to ISO raise very polarized and apparently based on your opponents. What does it mean, very polarized? Either very strong hands or very weak hands, but I'm going to show you that later based on the ranges I have constructed for you. We want to ISO jam rather suited connected hands than offsuited king x, queen x type of hands with around 12 big blinds. Why and how the V looks like I'm going to show you later as well. Yeah, what exactly to ISO jam for certain stack size? Here again, I can only show you the way. You have to go the way by yourself. So do that for 12, 15, 17, 21 big blinds, 8 big blinds, and then you will get a feeling what you can ISO jam for certain stack sizes. Here I'm going to show you one example for 12 big blinds, but it's pretty much the same. And it will help you a lot if you do that by yourself. Also, sometimes it's really hard to give your opponent a proper range, but what you can do is you just apply the mirror thinking. So you're basically giving them hands or giving them a range based on what you would do in that spot. And then you also take into account what you have experienced on your stake. Population tendencies, reads, whatever, everything that might help you to create ranges. Also, that is why it is why it's so important to do user-to-user coachings, to have a good network of players, because these are the spots where you can where you will benefit more if you have a bigger sample size of hands, or not of hands, of opinions. So if, let's say, if you have a group of 4 or 5 grinders and they tell you, oh, I would actually think that the range looks like this and this, and you were on the completely wrong path, then you know, okay, you probably it was just variance in your experience, and the ranges actually look like completely different in reality. So, especially in this spot, when it comes to guessing, it's super good to have people around you that can help you and share their opinion. And let's say you have an experience of 10k sit and goes, and you have 5 other buddies who have on average also 15k experience of sit and go, rather than having only a pool of 10k sit and goes, you have a pool of 60 to 80k sit and goes, and a much wider range of experience, and you can nail down the ranges way better. So surround yourself with other poker players, and then you will be able to analyze these spots more properly. Also, don't worry too much. It's not about nailing the exact hands what you can ISO jam. It's more about understanding what hands make sense against certain opponents. If someone is limping a ton, to know, okay, what kind of hands have the highest EV. Also, against the tighter range, again, what hands have the highest EV against the tighter opponent. And if you know that you can jam, let's say, more suited connected hands rather than off-suited high card hands, then you're already good to go. But I mean, if you're wrong and you made a mistake and you jammed 6-4 suited, whereas 6-5 suited might be your only profitable jam, then okay, it happens. But if you're wrong every single time and you're jamming off-suited hands or off-suited connector hands or whatever kind of bullshit hands, so you're making tremendous mistakes again and again and again, this will decrease your win rate a lot. It's not about being wrong here and there. So don't worry too much. That happens. Playing post-flop out of position. Play straightforward with fish. Just play your value hand straightforward. You don't need to think about protecting your range, having a proper call on range, unless you know the fish is very aggressive. Then you can also make adjustments, obviously. Under or with 50 big blinds and below, check raise and stack off with any vulnerable top pair on 9xx boards and lower, and mix in some gutters or backdoor hands. But here, let's say the board is 7-3 deuce, you have a hand like 8-7 off or 7-5, just check raise and get it in, and don't let him hit a hand with Jack 10, Queen Jack, 10-9, Ace 10 or whatever. So we have value anyway. There are lots of players who gonna stack off with any pair in heads up, or at least call the flop, peel with king highs, ace highs, draws. So just play straightforward. Don't check raise fold high equity hands. So let's say the board is 7-6 deuce and you're 15 bigs deep, or even 20 bigs, and you're check raising 4-5 and you get jammed on and you can't call. So don't check raise this hand. So only check raise if you can call and all in. I mean, apparently don't make it too big just to justify making the call once he jams on you. No, don't raise too big. Still have a proper raise size, and then if he jams on you and you can call, then it's okay. But don't raise fold high equity hands. Same applies here. Don't raise equity. Also, the more Broadway heavy / high card heavy the board is, the less we can raise for value. Really important. One thing I want to mention here as well, the deeper you get, the more you also want to think about, do we have enough equity to get broke? For example, if you play 20 bigs and you have a hand like 7-5 on 7-3 deuce, it might be a little bit too thin. Even though it's probably never too bad to stack off with the top pair in heads up for around 20 big blinds. But in general, there is more value in just check calling, also having some weaker top pairs in your check calling, especially when playing deeper. But if you're shorter, it's totally fine. Range protection, yeah, when speaking about the ace high, king high boards or Broadway boards, because we don't have that many strong range hands in our range. We're jamming lots of aces pre-flop, we're raising lots of king x hands pre-flop, we're raising lots of Broadway hands in general pre-flop. So if we start raising our weak top pairs, let's say on king, queen, whatever, our range gets really, really, really unbalanced. So we also want to have the top pairs in our check call range. It's not that beneficial to raise these hands anyway, because protection is pretty much meaningless. There are not many overcards possible, so top pair stays a top pair for turn and river almost every single time. So don't think about that. Yet, exception versus fish and weak regulars, play straightforward. If you think they are just stacking off too light, they're peeling too many draws, they're calling stations, then just play straightforward. But in general, especially on ace high boards, you don't want to do that. Because especially these days, people know, okay, you cannot have an ace, so they might be very aggressive. Especially against aggressive fish, you want to check call more value hands on these kind of ace high, king high boards and let him bluff. So some hand examples with lower than 15 big blinds. So let's say 6-5 off on 7-3 deuce, totally fine to raise. 5-4, I mean this is something you can check jam, but I would probably just check call. 7-4 and 7-3 deuce we raise. 9-8 on 7-3 deuce we can raise, especially with the backdoor flush draw. Any deuce x or 3x on 7-3 deuce is a call. Right, let's take a closer look for the range construction for preflop. So this is 12 big blinds versus a limp. The orange hands are the hands we are checking, the green ones are the hands we are shoving, the red ones, the hands we are raising 3 times the big blind for value. You should always raise at least 3 times the big blind. You can raise 3.5. With 20 big blinds and more, you should definitely raise probably around 3.5 big blinds, and with around 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 50 big blinds, you should raise around 3 times the big blind. And the pink one, or the light red hands, are the hands we are bluff raising. It's 3 times the big blind. And then you can see that we are roughly raising 40% from the big, 35%, considering the hands we are jamming, the hands we are raising for value, and the hands we are raising as a bluff. So we are raising around 35%, which is close to the optimum. It's somewhere around 35 to 40%. So we are pretty good here. As you can see, also we are not raising a hand like 9-8 suited or Jack 10 off suited. Again, here, don't waste equity. You don't want to raise for the hand like 9-8 suited. And 9-8 6 suited is also not that sexy to raise for it, but it's not as strong as 9-8 suited. So raise folding a hand like 4-3, 8-5, 8-6 off, 7-5 off is okay. So we're still having equity against the calling range. So we don't want to choose the bottom of our range just because we don't want to waste equity, because then we could say, yeah, oh, then we're raising 3 deuce offsuit because it has less equity, so I'm wasting as less equity as possible. No, we also want to think about, okay, what equity do we have against this calling range? Also, these hands benefit a little bit of not being blocked that much by his calling range, because he's apparently calling all his broadways, strong suited connected hands. So a hand like 6-3 suited is not blocked by so many 6 or 3x hands. Same for 8-4, 8-5, 8-6, 7-5 suited. 9-6 is a little bit closer though. But yeah, in general, our two pair outs are live, our straight outs are live. We have good board coverage also. If we only raise our value hands, we are fucked up on low card boards pretty much every single time. So we have decent hands on low and middleish kind of boards, as well as high card boards. And then we're good to go. So every other hand we're checking. If you know the opponent is limping a ton, you can start jamming more hands rather than checking them back. So a hand like 9-8 suited, Jack-8 suited, 10-8 suited, Queen-7 suited. But we're gonna take a closer look into that right now, how the V looks like of certain hands. 1 second. So what I did here was, oh no, sorry, it is here. So what I did was I gave my opponent a limping range, which might look like this. Okay, this is almost the same range we are playing. And then I look what I could jam against this. And then I am adjusting a little bit. By the way, don't be afraid, it says it can jam 100%, but you have to compare the V of checking and jamming. Most of the time the V of checking a hand like 9-5 off is way higher than jamming. So it doesn't make any sense for the opponent to jam a hand like 9-5 off, because he would gain a way higher EV by checking back. So by jamming these kind of hands, he's kind of like decreasing the EV of his strategy when jamming. So let's see what he can jam. And as you can see, a hand like King 5 off is actually not as good as a hand like 9-8 suited or 10-8 suited, just because we have better equity against the calling range. But I actually wanted to speak more about what might be the case in reality. So in the reality, often people just jam the suited kings. The same for these kind of hands, because they know it's very, very profitable and they don't really want to limp call it. Also, they are jamming more of these kind of hands and something like this. Okay, they might also not play as many small blinds as they should, so we let him fold some of these kind of hands. And then you can already see that hand like 6-5 suited becomes better than King deuce off, or even 7-6 suited, or 8-6 suited. 8-7 suited is, for example, way better than King 6 off. And if we adjust the range a little bit more and take out, for example, a hand like Jack 10 suited and Queen 10 suited, and let him jam also more off-suited kings, because this is really often the case that between 10 and 15 big blinds people just jam the strong off-suited kings because they know it's a very profitable jam. And then you see that 7-8, 7-6, 8-6 suited is way better than King 7 or even King 8 off. So even 5-4 suited is better than King 3 and King deuce off. So we definitely want to push these kind of hands against most people's small blind limping range with 12 big blinds. Now, if you do the same for 10 and 11 big blinds, it becomes even more clear, because then people definitely jam all the King X and the suited kings. So the range is more Broadway heavy from our like his limp calling range, and with these kind of hands you have more equity. And the off-suited kings, they perform really poor against a calling range. Also, if we look at the off-suited queens, the Queen 9 off, and compared with 8-7 suited, or Queen 8 off compared with 4-5 suited, you definitely want to jam 4-5 suited rather than Queen 8 off. Or Queen 5 suited is not as good as 7-6 suited. So even the suited high card hands are not as good as the suited connected hands, even though they're suited and have a high card. So don't ever overestimate the value of high card hands in heads-up games. So when you're facing an opponent that is limping a ton, you want to start putting these hands in your jamming range. Alright guys, that's it for today. It was a little bit longer than expected, especially for an update, but it was really important to me that you have the best strategies for these days to approach heads up. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback or whatever, you can write me an email, bensob@raiseyouredge.com, or you can also write in my blog. You can post hands there, especially when you're making heads up analysis. You can ask for my opinion, and I'm really happy to help you. So you should use that, and then I'm really looking forward to hear from your feedback and to see hands. That's it. That was bensob for raiseyouredge.com.